So, so I'm just gonna dive right in. When we were putting this exhibit together, we were very cognizant of the women from the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame who had been and who exemplify Colorado leaders of democracy. Women are leaders of democracy, working to further the form of government that we revere in the United States and working to strengthen our communities. Colorado has led the nation in democratic progress and women's rights in many instances. Colorado was the first state in the US to expand suffrage rights to women, the first state to elect female state legislators, including those of color, and Colorado women regularly turn out to vote in numbers that dwarf other states' records. But women's leadership in Colorado began long before official statehood. Not surprisingly, our region's indigenous and pioneer populations produced women with the strength and courage to demand equal voice and power and serve as leaders of their communities. One powerful platform for these leaders has been and remains the nonpartisan League of Women Voters of Colorado. Let's learn about the fascinating and accomplished women, all inductees into the Colorado Women's Fame, featured in the Colorado Leaders of Democracy exhibit found on the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame Google Arts and Culture exhibit page. Amashi Ochini Powers, a full-blooded member of the Southern Cheyenne tribe, was an innovative mediator between cultures during Colorado's early territorial period of the 1860s and 1870s. She was an active participant in her family's cattle ranching business, general store, and hotel. She was obviously a leader in her community. Her life exemplifies the essential role played by Native American women in shaping our state. She bridged the diverse cultural traditions of the Native American, Euro-American, and Mexican people who resided in Colorado's southeastern plains. Dr. Bonnie Clark, an archaeologist and a biographer, says, Amashi lived in a time that brought sweeping changes to the region, requiring the creation of society. Cultural mediators like she built the foundation of the American West. Frances Weisbart Jacobs risked her own health to serve the poor in the slums of Denver amidst poverty and disease. Known as the Mother of Charities, she founded the national charity we now call the United Way. Poverty, disease, and homelessness coexisted with myths of opportunity from Denver's earliest gold rush days. An early Jewish settler, Jacobs recognized this cruel reality when she arrived in the 1870s. Armed only with Grandpa's pine tar soap and a satchel stuffed with food and medicine, she risked her own health to serve the poor in the slums of Denver. So that the city's penniless consumptives could breathe free, and that's those who had tuberculosis, and be treated for free, she envisioned National Jewish Hospital, established the year of her death in 1892. National Jewish remains the leading research and treatment center for lung disease in the world. There are 16 stained glass windows in the Colorado Capitol Dome, 15 men, and Frances Weisbart Jacobs. She has been inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame, and she told the Rocky Mountain News in 1988, I know that whenever women lead in good work, men will follow. Her niece, Teresa Jarecki, says, Aunt Frank was that rare combination of dreamer and doer. She not only dreamed of free kindergartens and orphanages, a home for the aged and a hospital, but with good business sense brought them to reality. Elizabeth Piper ends Hensley was an American educator and suffragist whose leadership was instrumental in Colorado's victorious campaign for full voting rights in 1893, full voting rights for women in 1893. Hensley dedicated her career to organizing for women's rights, especially for American women, and led important local, state, and national women's organizations that were both white and Black. She founded several organizations for African American women to ensure they were educated about voting rights and were provided with ways to advance their communities. Hensley founded the Colorado Association of Colored Women's Clubs in 1904 and served as an officer on the State Board of Directors of the Colorado State Federation of Women's Clubs, the influential state organization primarily led by white women. Hensley was one of only a handful of Black women leaders nationwide who worked for suffrage rights within a racially integrated campaign organization, the Colorado Nonpartisan Equal Suffrage Association. She served as its treasurer. Hensley was honored in 2021 as a League of Women Voters of Colorado Leader of Democracy for her advocacy for racial and gender equity. Antoinette Tony Perry Fruoff was a stage actress, director, humanitarian, and activist. She loved appearing on the stage when she was a high school student at Denver's East High School. She began her acting career in earnest as a leading lady and patron of the arts in New York City. She also produced and directed Broadway productions, including Denverite Mary Chase's Harvey. She co-founded the American Theater Wing, and during World War II, she headed its Stage Door Canteen program, which offered entertainment and hospitality to hundreds of homesick servicemen and servicewomen in New York and other cities. After her death, the American Theater Wing established the Tony Awards in Antoinette Perry's honor, recognizing excellence in live theater, now the American theater industry's most coveted award. The award also honors her lifetime efforts to foster new talent. And I made sure that this particular trophy that's on the right on the screen, if you look very hard, the light's a little difficult maybe to see it, but there on that trophy, it says Antoinette Perry Award, which is the Tony Award. So she's memorialized in many ways. She said, Tony said, I wanted to be an actress as soon as I could lisp. I didn't say I was going to become an actress. I felt I was one. Oklahoma native Aletta Crane was high school valedictorian and earned 2 master's degrees despite her childhood of poverty and racial segregation. World War II brought her to Denver, where she joined thousands of women recruited to make bullets at the Denver Ordnance Plant, now the Denver Federal Center. One of only 3 African-American women to enter officer training in the U.S. military in 1943, Crane in the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, the only Black woman retained by the U.S. military after World War II. She retired from the Air Force as a major. For 35 years, Crane brought her passion for equal rights to the U.S. Department of Labor as Region 8, which is Colorado and the Mountain West region, administrator of the Federal Women's Bureau. About her experience at the ordnance plant, she related, there were only 2 jobs open to Negro girls, a maid's job or working in the lead shop. There was quite a bit of discrimination. Born into a newspaper publishing family, Morley Ballantyne was a prominent Colorado newspaper editor and publisher who promoted women's rights while advancing education and culture in Southwest Colorado. She and her husband, author, owned and ran the Durango Herald starting in 1952, and the family still holds an interest in the paper. Morley Ballantine was named the first woman chair of the Colorado Press Association in 1968. For 50 years, she wrote columns and editorials and was a pillar in the community. For decades, she ran the Ballantine Family Fund, which was established in 1957 to support arts and educational organizations throughout the Southwest region of Colorado. She achieved many firsts, received numerous awards, and was active in the League of Women Voters for 54 years. Her philanthropy philosophy was, fulfill the community needs that you see and esteem, not that somebody else wants. And she said, education is really the basis of our lives. The youngest of the Little Rock Nine, Carla Walls at age 14 and 8 other African-American students integrated Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas in 1957 amidst controversy and violence. She wanted the best education possible, as she knew, like Maury Ballantine just said, that education was the key to opportunity. This act of courage and defiance by the Little Rock Nine sparked dramatic challenges to the racially segregated American public educational system throughout the nation. Carla Walls Lanier's family moved to Colorado in 1962, where she earned a BA from the University of Northern Colorado, married, raised 2 children, and founded a real estate company. The Congressional Gold Medal was presented to the Little Rock Nine in 1999 for their contributions to the cause of equality. A lifelong advocate of equal education for all, she was honored in 2014 as a League of Women Voters of Colorado Leader of Democracy. Carla Walls Lanier was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 2015. She said, I was not going to give up because that way they would have won. In the picture on the left, you can see Carlotta. She's immediately to the right of the military man. And that dress that she's wearing, she did not know that her mother had saved that dress, but that dress is now in the Smithsonian in the African American Museum, along with her diploma and her papers. And Carlotta and I spoke last evening for Virtual Authors Corner #2 for the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame, which was recorded. So you'll actually be able to watch it once it's live on the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame website. Just look for Virtual Authors Corner #2. Ruth Stockton served 3 years in the Colorado House of Representatives, 1961 to 1964, and then in the state Senate for 20 years, from 1965 to 1985. She was elected the first female president pro tem of the Senate for 4 of those years. Stockton waited until after her daughter had left home for college to run for political office, representing Jefferson County. She emerged as a powerful legislator and champion for good government. Although a tough negotiator, she worked across the aisle to get results. A moderate Republican, Stockton worked for passage of a wide array of legislation dealing with children's health and education, the Equal Rights Amendment, reproductive choice for women, rehabilitation of alcohol and drug abusers, mental health programs, and transportation and highway safety. And she always kept a close eye on the state budget. She said, I'm ready to sit down and work it out. When the going gets rough, they know I'm not the weak sister. Rachel Knowl changed the face of Denver's school system. In 1965, she was the first African-American woman elected to public office in Colorado and the first African-American elected to the Denver Public School Board. She introduced the Knowl resolution to desegregate Denver public schools on the heels of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. It was passed amid great controversy, media attention, and multiracial citywide support. Public opposition, including hate mail and angry phone calls, did not discourage her. She said, "I have a deep faith that if you're right, you don't give up. And that's what I felt, that I was right, and somebody had to stand up." United States Supreme Court's landmark decision of 1973, Keyes versus Denver School District Number 1, upheld Knowl's vision of providing quality education in racially integrated schools for all Denver students. Later, she chaired the Department of Afro-American Studies at Metropolitan State College, now University, and was elected to the University of Colorado Board of Regents. She also said, "The death of Dr. Martin Luther King has fostered the attention of concerned people of goodwill upon the deep and festering injustices of modern urban existence, particularly in the area of public education." Denver native Cleo Parker Robinson is a renowned teacher, choreographer, cultural ambassador, and artistic director who uses the power of dance to unite communities across cultures and language barriers. Cleo's a pal of mine, and I'm always delighted actually to spend time with her. You heard that I'm an electrical engineer. And Cleo, everything she does is dance. She speaks lyrically, she moves lyrically, she dances. I mean, it's just a part of who she is, and it's just so amazing to me to see her and to interact with her and to know that it's just such a basic part of who she is. Following serious childhood illnesses, at age 10, she suffered a heart attack as a result of rheumatic fever and treatment delays due to racism. She had a near-death experience, and dance became her refuge. She received formal training at Colorado Women's College, the Alvin Alley Dance Center, and Arthur Mitchell's Dance Theater of Harlem. With backing from the federal government's Model Cities program, Cleo launched her Denver dance troupe, Cleo Parker Robinson Dance, in 1970 as a cultural resource to fight poverty, champion social justice, unite people across all backgrounds and ages, and bring the artistry of African American dance to the community. She was named to the National Council on the Arts in 1998 and received the Kennedy Center Medal of Honor, which is a big deal, by the way, in 2005. Cleo Parker Robinson continues to connect people of the world through dance from her theater and school in Denver. Her philosophy of one spirit, many voices is evidenced in all of her activities around the world to bring joy and understanding through dance. In 1972, Arie Parks Taylor became the first African-American woman elected to the Colorado State House of Representatives, where she addressed a myriad of issues faced by women and the poor during her 6 terms in office. She had many firsts in her life. She was the first African-American woman to become chief clerk of the Denver Election Commission, the first African-American woman elected to the Colorado House of Representatives, and the first African-American woman in Colorado to serve as clerk and reporter. She rose from humble beginnings. At age 12, Taylor became the guardian for her 10 brothers and sisters, including a newborn, after her mother died in childbirth. She successfully reared them and then graduated from Ohio's Miami University. After a groundbreaking career in the Women's Air Force, she moved to Denver in 1958. During her 6 terms in the House, she chaired the State Veterans Affairs Committee, and she sponsored legislation creating treatment centers for sickle cell anemia and hemophilia, and allowing women to obtain credit in their own names. The first Colorado woman elected to Congress, Pat Schroeder represented Colorado for 12 terms in the United States House of Representatives, starting in 1972. She worked tirelessly to establish national family policy, including issues like parental leave, childcare, family planning, and more. She wrote the Family and Medical Leave Act in 1985 and worked to enact legislation and secure funding for key legislation to support women's health research. Schroeder was a leader on critical issues of foreign and military policy, arms control, armament, women's economic equality, educational opportunity, and civil, constitutional rights, and pro-choice legislation. She was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 1995. Her biography, as you can see, is titled 24 Years of Housework, and the place is still a mess. And her famous quote when she was elected to Congress in 1972 with 2 small children was, "I have a brain and a uterus, and I use both." A formative experience for her happened after she was admitted to Harvard Law School. And I heard this from Pat during interviews that Ellie Greenberg and I conducted last year for a book that we signed a contract for yesterday, tentatively titled Over, Under, Around, and Through: How Hall of Famers Surmount Obstacles. Right after she was admitted to law school and they all arrived, the 15 women in her class, the dean of the law school, who still had not gotten used to having women as students, even though such had been happening for a few years, invited the 15 women over to his home for dinner. Pat said the food at the dinner was horrible and that she hoped that things would get better, but the evening wasn't over. The dean asked the 15 women to put their chairs in a circle, and then he asked each one in the group to tell the group why they were at Harvard Law School. And she said her role model in this discussion said, "Because I didn't get into Yale." And that was the end of the evening. And that was when Pat said she learned how to stand up to bullies and how she used that approach throughout those 25 years that she spent in Congress. She said, "I honestly think democracy is messy. But one of the things that troubles me that I hear from young people is that they don't want to run because it's a mess. The reason I wanted to run was because it was a mess." In 1976, when Linda Alvarado wanted to start her own construction company, she couldn't get a loan because she was a woman. Her parents mortgaged their home to help her start her business. Yet by the time she was 27, she was asked to sit on a corporate board. And by the way, for those of you that don't know, that's unheard of. Today, she is president and CEO of Alvarado Construction and broke down many barriers in the male-dominated world of construction. In 1992, she became the first Latino, male or female, to bid for the ownership of a Major League Baseball franchise. Today, as co-owner of the Colorado Rockies, Alvarado takes seriously her role as a Latina role model and benefactor. In 2015, I had the opportunity to moderate a panel on which Linda was sitting along with 2 other women who have, Carlotta and Pippa Merrick, for a benefit for the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. And Linda was wearing her World Series ring. I mean, if I wore it, my hand would drag on the ground. It's really a honking big ring, which she's very proud of. She's been inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame and as one of a handful of women designated as a Sarah Lee frontrunner. She donated her $25,000 honorarium to the International Women's Forum for Scholarships for Women. Linda says, "The biggest mistake we can make is not wanting to make a mistake." Holly Baca says the greatest gift God ever gave her was being born a female child to a poor Mexican American family in a bigoted community. at a time when store signs in Greeley, Colorado said, "No dogs or Mexicans allowed." Holly was fueled by her determination from age 3 to prove herself as good as others. She served in the Colorado legislature for 12 years, starting in 1974, and in 1978 was the first Latina elected to the Colorado Senate. She has a very long list of firsts for women and Latinas and has served as a very strong advocate for Latinx and gender equity. Baca was the first Latina to chair the Democratic National Convention and the first to receive a major party nomination for the US Congress. She's served 3 presidents and as a top leader in the national and state Democratic Party, which actually that leadership started when she was in college. Her ancestral roots run deep in Colorado, back to the Mexican land grants established in what is now the San Luis Valley to encourage settlement before the United States took over the area in 1848. Holly Baca was honored in 2021 as a League of Women Voters of Colorado Leader of Democracy. She says, "We have to value the other people, their value system, culture, history. If we honor those differences, then we can look at the human thread that unites all of us as human beings." The first woman and youngest appointee to serve as a Colorado Supreme Court justice, and that was in 1979, Jean Dabufski spent most of her legal career in the service of disadvantaged, underserved, and voiceless populations in the state. She is most remembered for filing the case Romer versus Evans, which she successfully argued before the United States Supreme Court. The case was filed against Amendment 2, which prohibited laws banning discrimination. The decision finding Amendment 2 unconstitutional laid the groundwork for overturning bans against same-sex marriages nationwide. She said, "There's just been a sea change. Now women are everywhere. Women are judges, district attorneys, and state attorneys general." As well, they should be. Educator and advocate for the Latina community, Maria Guajardo was born to illiterate Mexican migrant workers. Since 1988, she has committed herself to improving the lives of children and has advocated to keep children in school by understanding why they drop out, worked for world peace, and advocated for children in third world countries. She's been active in youth development as well as issues related to Latino education and healthcare. Guajardo's doctoral dissertation in psychology examined why Latinas drop out of school. She traveled the world to discover how children play a role in creating world peace. The daughter of immigrant parents became executive director of the Mayor's Office for Education and Children in 2003. In this position, she advanced the Denver preschool bill, which created universal access to quality preschool options for 4-year-olds. She now serves as the Dean of the Faculty of International Liberal Arts at Soka University in Japan. Guajardo says many of her experiences in Japan as non-Japanese speaking have led her to much greater empathy for her parents. And as the first female dean and first non-Japanese dean at the university, she is continually moving mountains. She says about those mountains, "I have no regrets. I wouldn't have missed this opportunity for anything." She's still in Tokyo, by the way. "As a poor Mexican child growing up in the United States, I felt invisible. I was the other. Education allowed me to discover my abilities. It nurtured my curiosity and defined my passion for justice." And speaking of educators, Martha Yuriosi was the first and only principal to pioneer a Montessori elementary school. The founder and former president of Family Star, which she founded in 1991, Yuriosi was a pioneering Hispanic American counselor in the Denver Public Schools and the first secondary bilingual counselor. Her exploration of the reason for students dropping out of high school led to her deep commitment to Montessori as an education delivery mechanism that enables students from all backgrounds to thrive and succeed. Thanks to Yuriosi, any Denver child may benefit from this creative educational program, regardless of income or background. She is recognized nationally and internationally for her work with Montessori education at Denver's Mitchell, now Denison Montessori School, and the bilingual Family Star Montessori preschools. Yuriosi believes in the Montessori method, which emphasizes independence, freedom within limits, and respect for a child's natural psychological, physical, and social development. In fact, I say Martha Yuriosi, who is a very dear friend of mine and looks amazingly like my mother, lives and breathes Montessori. And my husband confirmed that she looks just like my mother. Yuriosi says that during her 45-year career in the Denver Public Schools, anytime there was a major problem to address, it seems someone would ask Martha to fix it. Actually, she says, they would just assign the problem for her to do. But with her relentless optimism and her belief that it is better to light one candle than to curse the darkness, she would rise to the occasion and handle the problem. She said, Family Star had small beginnings with only a few children and students, but we had the vision to become a leader in early childhood education through uncompromising Montessori teachings, and we have succeeded. The first woman to serve as mayor of Colorado Springs, and that was in 1997, Mary Lou Maypiece advocated for equal treatment for all. A hallmark of her administration was the Springs Community Improvement Program, which invited all citizens to participate in brainstorming sessions about city spending priorities. After her terms, which saw the first female municipal judges appointed, and she was term limited, which is why she was no longer mayor, she worked at the Gay and Lesbian Fund for Colorado, furthering her objectives of equality, diversity, and inclusivity. Maypiece continues her efforts to build economically self-sufficient and strong women who pursue an education and participate in the electoral process. Mary Lou Maypiece was 16 years old when her father was killed in a railroad accident. Her mother, who was pregnant, became incapacitated with grief. So Maypiece raised her 12-year-old sister and then her infant sister. Fortunately, she had a high school teacher who insisted that she get away to college. And fortunately, also by then, her mother was able to reassume her maternal role. Those early experiences taught Maypiece to have a realistic view of life, and that life is not everything you want it to be. She also learned not to give up easily and that she was in charge of herself. She knows that if it isn't her, who will it be? Mary Lou Maypiece said, I think people want good government and good service. There's no such thing as a Republican or Democratic pothole. Modern day Renaissance woman Dottie Lam is an author, speaker, university educator, activist, and feminist. She served for First Lady of Colorado for 12 years from 1975 to 1987, and she used that high-profile platform to advocate for women's rights, including reproductive choice and access to health care, quality child care, equal pay for equal work, and the Equal Rights Amendment. In 1994, she was a delegate to the UN Conference on Population and Development, and in 1995 to the World Conference on Women. After an unsuccessful run for the US Senate in 1998, Dottie resumed her lifelong commitment to raising awareness of and solving problems that hold women back in Colorado and around the world. Dottie told us when we interviewed her that she was deeply depressed after she lost the Senate race in 1998, that all she did for months was sleep and ski. But in the spring of 1999, she received a call from the Women's Success Forum asking her to do a seminar at the conference. She said she was crying on the phone, saying, "Why do you want me? I'm not a success." And the woman who was organizing the conference said, "Well, you're just thinking about your last Senate run. Think of all the things you've done before where you were successful." Out of that, she developed a conference workshop session titled "Reaching High, Falling Far, and Moving On." That evolved into a class on risk-taking that she taught at the University of Denver. Through her speeches, books, articles, and regular op-ed columns in the Denver Post, Dottie ensures that women's voices are heard in our political and public debates. A co-founder of the Women's Foundation of Colorado, she served as its first president. A founder of the Democratic Women's Caucus of Colorado, Dottie Lam was honored in 2016 as a League of Women Voters of Colorado Leader of Democracy. She says, "Dare, care, share, and be fair." The first person to head 3 foundations in Colorado, Lauren Castile has served as the CEO of the Women's Foundation of Colorado since 2015. A lifelong advocate for social justice, she has worked with nonprofits to help them become more inclusive of underrepresented populations and people of color. Lauren is acknowledged as an advocate for women, children, youth, and families. Growing up surrounded by the civil rights movement as the daughter of activists Margaret and Whitney Young, her motto has been "From surviving to thriving." She was honored in 2021 as a League of Women Voters of Colorado Leader of Democracy. Lauren Castile says, "All women and girls have the right to thrive, not merely survive." I love this quote from Margaret Mead that Charlotte Weisman and I used to start the introduction to our book, Her Story, A Timeline of the Women Who Changed America. "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." And what that means to me is that change in the world only takes one person. And everyone on this call today can be that one person. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. That was awesome. Does anyone have any questions for Jill? If so, please go ahead and unmute yourselves and go ahead and ask.
Mine is not a question, but I'd sure like to add a few things here. Number one, thank you to Jill and Carlotta for last night. Thank you to Jill for tonight. Thank you to Jill for Google Arts and Culture. It's amazing. I also want to thank Beth Hendricks for getting League of Women Voters to sponsor the portrait for Elizabeth Ensley. That's how we got Elizabeth's portrait sponsor for the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. And I don't know if people on the call know or not, but Dottie will be speaking in the next week. I think it's May 6th at History Colorado. So we just
I have it in my calendar right here.
History Colorado, is it?
It's the 6th at noon.
Yes. And it'll be coming out in our social media, but I'm sure you can find it much more easily on History Colorado. So lots of wonderful things going on.
And I like to say before the Q&A that I love the Q&A. It's actually my favorite part. And that I'm a trained expert witness. That's one of the things that I did during my 45-year career as an electrical engineer. Therefore, I'm trained to handle hostile questions. And I'm hoping that yours won't be hostile. But I do love this part. So ask away.
Well, I'm curious to know if you have a favorite. Jill.
If I have a favorite
Mm-hmm.
in the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame,
Yes.
I have so many favorites. It's so hard. I think I've now nominated 10 women or more to the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame, and I love every single one of them. And last evening, during the introduction for Carlotta, Marie Williams, who did a fabulous job as the moderator last evening, did mention that I nominated Carlotta to the National Women's Hall of Fame. I also nominated Temple Grandin. I've nominated more than 30 women to the National Women's Hall of Fame. I will put it in the chat. So let me just, okay. I don't know that this will be the title. Just signed the contract yesterday. And Marilyn Vanderburg Atler wrote the foreword. And actually, the whole book could just be the foreword. She did such a phenomenal job in the foreword that we don't need the rest of the book, but we're good.
Oh,
Oh my goodness. So I can't guarantee that that will be the title when it is published. Ma, do you have a question? Oh, you were just raising your hand. Okay.
Oh, come on, don't be shy.
Really, really.
Okay, Jill, I'll ask a
Thanks,
question.
thanks, ML. Thanks for doing that.
Well, you dust me off and wind me up, and so here I am again. It's always an interesting question when somebody says, well, who's your favorite? And I've faced that, for what, 35 years now since we started it. And it's tough because, every 2 years we discover new people and we never forget the others. When we started, we had very, very small teas at my house out on the patio. And we had like Olita Crane and Jean Yancey and any number of the inductees at the very beginning, to have tea. And that evolved with new leadership and whatever into an off year from an induction, kind of a tea, although we used some beverages that were not tea, much to many of our pleasure. And so I think when I see the interaction between all of the women that have been inducted, they love talking to each other. And the teas kind of are a way to do that, but I keep thinking, wow, if we were to each, as, I don't know, historical participants or whatever, have a dinner party with a number of them, who would be our selections?
Wow.
Because that can create a very, I know as a cook, I kind of focus on around some of the food. I just want to make more dim sum, but just think what that would be like to have up to as many people as not make it big, but to have those intimate conversations where all of a sudden you learn more about the inductees that maybe, like Carlotta said last night, she didn't even want to talk about her history
For 30 years.
30 years. And we would have been less.
Well, what we would have been
enriched.
poorer for it.
She has made, as you have as well, such a huge difference. So it's what women are so good at.
Well, ML, I'm actually going to veer from what you said, but this is what the thought that it triggered for me. And this is some of the things that I said actually last night. The book, Over, Under, Around, and Through, wouldn't have happened but for the pandemic.
Yes, you mentioned, yeah.
There wouldn't have been a virtual happy hour. And because the women, and I didn't say this exactly last night, but these are busy women, you know, they are running around the world, they're doing all kinds of things, and Ellie's busy and I'm busy. And we wouldn't have had time to do 31 hour interviews, hour plus interviews with these women because they wouldn't have been available. And to your point about having a dinner party, these Zoom calls, no one held anything back. Everyone talked honestly and openly about issues that they've had in their lives. And we did Maria's from Tokyo. I mean, we would have never been able to do that without Zoom and the pandemic. And to
It's been a great tool. I do have to admit or come free about this. Michael and I have been having virtual happy hours with our friends around the country for a number of years. So this was nothing new for us.
well, it was new for me.
It was, and so, however, we have an opportunity
right.
to connect.
Right.
Is important, and that's in keeping that relationship going with, as we used to refer to them as the ladies, the women who were inducted into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. All of these things that the Hall is doing in partnership with the League of Women Voters and with Girl Scouts of Colorado, whatever, I think is just wonderful. And thank you all for that.
I have a question.
Good.
It's kind of a little off the topic, but might be relevant. Do you think that the term limit laws that Colorado has hurt women politicians? There seem to be, I mean, Colorado is kind of unique in that we have more women than men, I think, in our legislature, but that's not where it is around the country. But I'm just wondering if term limits is something that might have had something to do with that. And it also reduces, you know, the longevity that really good legislators have and their impact on the state.
One of the things that I learned as an expert witness is that in areas where I have no expertise, I don't answer the question. And so I'm wondering if maybe the League of Women Voters, Beth, has a position on this, or if someone else who is really much more connected to the political situation has a perspective they would like to share.
I can only state that the League of Women Voters officially, the position is against term limits. Isn't that correct, Alice? Do you know?
Yes.
Yeah. So, but that's really interesting. I have no idea. And I wonder if anyone's done any research into your question. It would be interesting to kind of do some analysis on if Colorado's term limits have positively or negatively affected the number of women.
I had a very interesting conversation many years ago at a precinct caucus, and Gail Shetler happened to be in my precinct, and she was running for, I think she was running for governor. And at the time there was a ballot issue going on to limit the amount of money. It was a campaign limit. And she told me that it was hard for women to get money to finance their campaign. So she was against campaign finance limits for that reason. So there just seems to be a lot of other issues having to do with women and running for government that I thought maybe interrelated, and it is off the topic. I'm sorry, Jill.
No, but Gail also partnered with someone else to create a fund to raise money. And this is a national initiative that she did to support women who are running for office. And so she has been an incredible advocate. And actually, putting her money where her mission is.
Mhm.
Yeah, Judy Wagner and Gail
Yes.
run a nonprofit to specifically support women that are trying to run at the national level or the governor level. And they raised,
State level.
right, and I think they raised $6 million. That was in our call a couple of months ago. I think
And-
$6 million this year or something.
Yeah, and
Significant.
of course, we have to say, they're both inductees into the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame.
And they did a fireside chat in March, was it not?
Yeah, March. Yeah,
And that's probably,
it's on
and that's
YouTube.
also recorded.
It's on
on
YouTube.
YouTube.
Yeah, I wonder, Beth, if I probably need to update you. I've probably been negligent about updating you on some of the things that we're doing this year. And we've got quite a few, well, we've got 6 virtual events, 3 of which are done, and we'll have 3 YouTube videos within about a week and a half. So I'll share that with you,
Great, please do.
and we'll
Yes.
just keep lifting each other's boat.
Excellent. Excellent. Anyone else, any questions?
Just to comment that Jill, you did a great job in picking the group of women. I don't envy that. It was like I was curious to see who you were going to pick and who you were not going to pick. So great job, good selection. It had to have been difficult. Thanks.
Well, thank you, Leslie. And I am actually going to say that I worked collaboratively with Cine Hour, with the League of Women Voters, and pretty much Cine picked the women. We did go back and forth a little bit about who should be on the list, and that's who's in the exhibit. And so I did, obviously, for the presentation tonight, expanded bios of the women, because the way Google Arts and Culture works, it's almost like, I think you have 250 characters, and then it starts yelling at you, that you've exceeded the characters. But once I realized that it doesn't cut you off, you can still put them in, that it just yells at you, I put in whatever I want. But still, not very long, because the Google Arts and Culture exhibits are often viewed on mobile phones. And so you don't really want a lot of text, because you don't want to lose people. You want to keep them engaged in the exhibit.
And this may be COVID related too. Thousands of people around the world, Europe loves Jill's Google Arts and Culture, are learning about Colorado's amazing women. Thousands of people around the world.
I just posted a link to the exhibit in the chat.
And there are 5 total exhibits, I think, that I've done now for the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame. And we're in discussions to do more. And I take ideas very well, actually, and implement them. And it's very fun for me, and it's very satisfying. I download the statistics and I send them to Beth every month. And it is really amazing when you open up the statistics and you see Germany and you see France and you see people from all over the world that are looking at the Google Arts and Culture exhibits. It's amazing, amazing. So.
Okay, last call for questions. Okay, 1 minute to spare from the hour deadline. So thank you, Jill. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, ML and Beth. Appreciate it. This has just been wonderful. Thank you to all who attended. We did record this and this will be up on our YouTube channel, but appreciate it. Y'all take care and hope to see you soon in
All right,
person.
thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Okay,
Thank
bye-bye.
Thank you.